Welcome to the Courageously Candid Coaching Podcast Series 2. I'm Matthew Radley, founder and CEO of MRA Executive Coaching, and this is the podcast where we say it as it is, where we are courageous and candid combined. We'll be stepping away from our professional corporate profiles and instead delving deep into the lives of global leaders and expert coaches, inviting them to go back to a moment in their lives of shift, stretch, or stillness. A moment where everything changed. In this episode, we will be seeking to understand what it takes to embed the highest standards of professional coaching and coaching supervision for internal coaches and for leaders who coach. We will challenge the level of discipline required and even challenge some of the global coaching bodies whose codes of ethics and guidance can often be clear on paper and yet impossible to put into practice. My guest today is Vanessa Cowland, Director of People Development Europe at Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, who has said yes to bringing her truth to our conversation. Vanessa has received her professional coaching qualification through MRA, as well as sponsoring 4 cohorts from across Europe to gain their qualifications and to maintain their standards through a program of robust professional coaching supervision. There will be no holding back the punches in this episode. So welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning of our relationship together then.
Mm-hmm.
So where did we first meet? How did you come to connect with MRA?
Oh, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a few years ago now. I was working in a really large organisation and I was working with some senior leaders that needed support. And so I met with you, Matt, before COVID, in a very tiny meeting room and talked to you about the challenges that we were having at that time from an exec development perspective. And once we started talking and connecting and you worked with those leaders in such a powerful way, and the feedback was so important to us to hear from a HR perspective. You built such credibility with one leader in particular and took them on such a powerful journey. And I haven't looked back from the decision to use MRA at that point. And since then, we've worked in 3 organisations together so far.
Yeah, superb. So today's conversation is a really important one for MRA. So obviously, we support organisations through executive coaching, team coaching, but one of our key primary drivers, as you well know, is embedding really good quality coaching qualifications and ensuring that they're well embedded within the system that they operate. So I think it'd be really lovely to hear from you on your experience of what that's look and felt like, the disciplines that are required, how you get the system ready, the stakeholder engagement, the lessons learned. So this podcast is all around embedding a really high quality, high standard, high ethics approach to internal coaching capability, both for internal coaches, but also leaders who want to become coaches in their own right. So that's the purpose of the conversation. Sophie, you've led a lot on this work with this organisation. So do you want to kick off?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been lucky enough to be the lead tutor on each of the 4 CWC cohorts. So we've worked together now for 4 years. We've put nearly 30 people through the programme. 99.9% of them have become accredited level 5 coaches, which is fantastic. And I often will because we also run supervision with you, and we'll talk perhaps a little bit about that in terms of holding and maintaining the standards. I think one of the things that really stands out the most for me when I think about particularly your internal cohort of coaches is that they're not necessarily put in the same bucket as some of the others that we work with around, even when the pressure is high in your current world, your internal professional coaches still make the time to be coaching. And that for me tells me about the standards that have been set internally as well as externally from the programme that we've partnered with everybody on. So talk to me about, what does highest standard really mean for you in the world of internal coaching?
Oh, good question. I think fundamentally, when you give somebody the role of internal coach, you need to be able to give them the skills to do that effectively. And so the training program, the learning environment, and the vision of what that looks like for people can be quite different when they start on the journey. And so small cohorts has been part of the power of that. So bringing that picture to life and allowing people to ask questions around what does that really look like is really, really important. And then the support. So we have supervision very, very regularly, and that can take lots of different forms. We also have CPD. We have a Teams channel where I'll often put little articles that I've seen or just check in and say, has anybody got capacity to take on further clients at the moment? And I'm always like, first come, first serve, because I'll often get a few people saying, yes, I could take a new one, I could take a new one. But fundamentally, it's a building a picture of the role of an internal coach and the value. And once both parties, the coach and the coachee, have experienced that relationship, it kind of builds an appetite. But the power of the supervision is bringing us all back to how can we be better at this? But also, what are our experiences and how can we support each other? Because it's not easy. It's not easy.
So if we were to go right back to the very beginning, that kind of moment where internally you're thinking, I know what we need here and we need this, but there must be a whole suite of nerves that sit behind, like, how do we get buy-in? How do we maintain the right standard? How we select the right provider? You know, your own sort of personal perspective on it, you know, wanting to deliver for you, for the organization, for everybody. So what's the bit that you go right back to at the very beginning where you go, I made the decision, blimey, did we get it right?
I think I still have moments of blimey, am I doing this right? If I'm totally honest,
okay,
sometimes
good.
when I hear some of
Let's
the stories.
talk about the blimeys.
Okay. But I think I've tried, and you know this better than most, Matt, I tried in 2 other organisations to get to the point that we're at now in my current organisation. And I think looking at the kind of mistakes I made there, one of the things that made the biggest difference in cohort 1 with Sophie supporting was having quite a lot of the HR leadership team as part of that cohort. Because coaching in our organisation is led as a HR initiative, a people team initiative. Fundamentally, if the senior leaders within the HR community do not understand really what coaching is, really how to have a powerful coaching conversation, then the reality is it's so much harder, and in previous organisations has failed for me because there was a lack of awareness of the value, the power and the how-to. So starting with HR colleagues, for me, I think has given me the biggest difference in this organisation, and we've perpetuated that. So new HR senior managers joining our organisation, this is something that is not forced at all, but is really encouraged when they join our organisation, so that as a people team, we should be using those skills in all of our interactions, both formally and more informally with other leaders. And that builds curiosity, and it also demonstrates best practice, ideally, a lot of the time, so that people aren't coming to the people team for answers, they're coming for a bit of reflection, a bit of provocative questions, ideally.
And what would you say is the most uncomfortable conversation you had to have internally about doing this work?
I think I've had a number. The challenge, particularly from business leaders, about time to attend, but also what's the value of me attending? What am I going to get out of this? You know, fundamentally, if I invest this time learning, and the expectation with an accredited course is that you have to do the practice beyond 5 full days of training, is a lot. And we run this program at a European level, so people give up their time to travel into our office in London to attend the courses as well. So there's been quite a lot of pushback about, you know, what am I giving up? And time is the key one.
And I think, you know, you touched on a couple of things there, again, which I sort of see a lot of in your organisation. Beyond the formal coaching that's now available, that informal coaching. And I think one of the threads that comes up a lot in the different cohorts is around how the impact of the everyday coaching leadership, not only helping the people team in terms of not having to resolve every issue, but that sort of downstream ripple effect of others being benefited from a coaching leadership style, not just a pure formal coaching, which I know you do both of, which I think is a really powerful thing. And actually, part of, if I were a leader and I wanted to bring a coaching culture into my organisation, I think one of the things you've done exceptionally well as well, Vanessa, is around setting people up really well. So the process through which you go through for people to nominate themselves to join the programme is really rigorous, isn't it? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because you set expectations around time and commitment and all of that, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So when each year we plan the programme months in advance, and part of that is to get, senior people, their diaries get filled up. So we really want to book the time for them to make sure that we make this journey as easy as possible, because we want them out of the business and really present with their learning for those 5 days. And then they have to find the time on top to do the real learning, which is in the practicing.
Yeah.
So we give people a really long lead up. So we typically start January, February of the calendar year, but we've got those dates in their diaries from September, October. At that point, before we even start, I have a one-to-one conversation with each of them and just try and hear any concerns and start planning with them fundamentally. How can we mitigate that to the best of our abilities? And, again, time comes up again and again and again. And also access to a variety of clients. So we want to make sure that, yes, as a leader, you can practice this with your team. But also we want you to spread your net a little bit wider, because there is great learning when you're using your coaching skills with people maybe outside of our organisation, but fundamentally outside of your sphere of influence within the organisation. And that has benefits for the whole organisation. Our whole system can be quite closed. We work remotely. It's a lot of Teams meeting and not a lot of coffee conversations in person. And so internal coaching pool has really allowed that networking to happen in a really brilliant way that wouldn't have if we hadn't set things up the way we have, where we encourage the leaders that learn how to coach to go outside of people that they would normally be interacting with to do their practicing and developing their early coaching relationships. There's some real value in that. It's a bit brave, probably, but it can, because they're so senior and they can have anybody across the organisation as the person they're working with. But we've only had positive feedback from coachees and also from the coaches in doing that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I would always talk to new clients around CWC is an expectation that they have to coach externally as well as internally, and the learning that a new trainee gets by being in the non-knowing space versus in the knowing space, the internal, external. So I'm 100% couldn't agree more with that. Just in terms
but not family.
Definitely not family.
This conversation
no, tried, failed many times.
Yeah.
Just going back to organisations, if somebody was listening to this podcast, around why did you, this is about you now rather than the organisation, why did you select an accredited programme? Why level 5? Why one that has a professional accreditation embedded within it? Why one that means you have to have continued supervision and CPD to maintain your professional standards? Why one that's got ethics and governance and a code of ethics that sort of sits underneath it? You could have picked anything from anywhere, from free courses to all the way through to sort of postgrads. Why did you select this for this organisation with that level of discipline?
Quality is really important to me. Okay. In this organisation, we've had our Chief Operating Officer attend this course. So I've done postgrad qualifications myself in coaching and got great learning from that. But the logistics of that are quite inflexible. Fundamentally, with MRA, we do have more flexibility. We set the dates. We plan that really far in advance. That helps with the success of the programme. which is one of the reasons, but it's the quality of the teaching and learning and the environment that's created over the last 4 years. You as an organisation have learnt about us as an organisation. And if we said, right, actually module 3 isn't going to work because we've got a huge unplanned company event that means that it's just not going to land at that point, we need to flex with everything, then Sophie's like, okay, this is how, let's get on a call and we'll fix it. And that really, really helps. But going back to, I have attended over my last 20 years, when my first coaching course was an internally led, designed course. It was great content-wise, but there was a lot of so what's for me. And actually, you know, I am possibly fanatical about the benefits that coaching can bring to any person and any organisation. And so the critical piece for me about getting a qualification that's accredited is that those individuals, they naturally leave organisations. We cannot keep everyone that we would want to in our organisation, but they can't leave the organisation that they've been accredited with behind as easily. And so when I was an internal coach in one organisation and then flipped to the next organisation, I had to do the training again. No problem with that. But there wasn't anything that just kept me tethered to coaching beyond my commitment and energy and enthusiasm. And so having accreditation, I believe, allows that ripple to be easier for those that might not be working in a people team, might not be working in an organisation where there is internal coaching pools in the beginning. They've still got something to give them credibility, but also gives credibility to those that attend the programme. A level 5 qualification is funded by us, absolutely challenges us as individual learners. I've done the programme myself in cohort 1. I probably didn't need to, already had accreditation and all of those things. But fundamentally, we're building a language in our organisation for our internal coaching pool from day one. In fact, from pre-mod, in terms of that learning. And so I wanted to understand all of the concerns, hear those firsthand, to then think about how do we fix those from a management of the programme, but also to make sure that I was role modelling as much as possible the right language, understood all of the tools and how they'd landed. And, you know, Sophie knows if I could attend every programme, I absolutely would.
Love it.
But I can't,
Can I ask a question of both of you, just briefly? I know this isn't part of the plan for the conversation, but if we were to look at it again through the lens of an organisation, new observing this conversation, what have been the most tricky moments? We've had 4 cohorts, 30 plus individuals go through, really high response rate, set well in the organisational system. Let's just talk about the tricky things, like the really tricky things that if an organisation could like tick them off early doors, it would really support the embedding in a really robust way. But I'm sort of interested from both from the sort of tutor lens and your experience of engaging with the organisation, but also from the organisation's lens. So what's been the tricky stuff?
One of the biggest challenges has been getting those that have attended the course, have got the enthusiasm, and then maybe they've been taken off course by a manager leaving or something that's happened in their personal life, and they haven't been coaching as actively and haven't been attending supervision. And then we have to have a conversation with them to say, probably not going to keep you in the coaching pool right now. You can come back, but we'll have to figure out what your re-entry point looks like. And you can see that it's work or personal challenge that has brought them away from being that active. And there's a disappointment there that they're going to have to take that break. But it is just a break. They can come back. We will make re-entry as easy as possible. But for me personally, when you're dealing with somebody that's trying their best to do everything all at once, it's just not the reality in any organisation throughout 4 years of being in an organisation. So for me, that is one of the more tricky points of active post-qualification. In qualification, I might leave it to you, Sophie, in terms of some of the stuff that we've seen.
Yeah, so I think think it's too strong to call it a challenge, but I think what it does is it brings a different dynamic to your cohorts, particularly, so the European flavour of it. In one of the modules, we talk quite extensively around contracting, as you would expect, but we talk about contracting through the lens of safeguarding, through the lens of asking questions around sort of neurodivergence and things. And actually what's really interesting, because each European country has a slightly different legislation, is that it's really interesting for the cohort, to understand what their colleagues are dealing with, but also in terms of some of the challenge back around, well, how will that work if legislation in my country is this? And I can't ask, I'm not allowed to ask about their physical health. So in some of the European countries, you can't. So it's a really interesting, so I think it's too hard to say it's a challenge. It might be challenging for the delegate to think, well, how do I now use this in my everyday? How do I sort of maneuver it around? And I think that's the beauty of having a European lens on the work. But I think what comes out the back of it generally is always let's talk about that. I've got something I can help you with. So it's a really nice building of a community outside of what would be their normal community as well.
Absolutely. And that community just grows and grows and supports, but it starts with those kind of more technical challenges, and then we resolve that, but keep that relationship, which I think is so beautiful in what we do. But the language skills in itself, every cohort, we have somebody where English isn't their first language, and they're always nervous about their capability in this space that relies on them doing that automatic translation in a deeply emotional coaching conversation. And how, I've got the question in Spanish or French and I can't get the right words in English. And we've both seen that, and I think you see it a lot more, Sophie. It is a challenge, but actually by day 2, they've settled. But going into it, that's often a real concern of the learners. Have I got the skills, both languages or just capacity and capability, to do this work well? And I think that's actually ramping up. That's one of the challenges of being successful. People intellectually buy in, but actually at a subconscious level are really super nervous that they're not going to be as good as people in cohort 2. Certainly they're all going to be better than cohort 1. But
No comment.
But I love then what supervision brings, because the way we run supervision with you guys is that all the cohorts come together. So whilst they might not have trained together and might work in different parts of Europe, actually when they come together, that shared learning around the challenges that they're facing, whether they've been coaching for 12 months or 4 years. But also, I think what you also benefit from is, and so what for the organisation now, as a result of some of this shared learning that's coming across this group of people, what does that mean for us? What internal changes do we need to make, or system changes do we need to think about? Or systemically, what's the impact of that? When we think about leadership styles, most organisations don't have a coaching leadership style as a cultural backdrop. And so often some of the conversations that we have are around, so what's getting in the way of you bringing coaching leadership into that area of the organisation? So I think it goes beyond the initial cohort, and it sort of blends into that sort of lovely supervision space. But then, you're forever furiously, I see you writing, that's a really interesting, I'll take that away and I'll think about it. So I think again, the ripples, they continue, don't they, beyond the initial training through that supervision.
Absolutely. And supervision, I think for me personally as a coach, I have external supervision for my external coaching work. That reflective space helps support resilience. I really believe that. I've been looking for evidence to bring that back to the business, and there isn't much evidence that we can bring. But in terms of when we arrive as an internal coaching pool into that supervision space, and you hear the tension that's in everyone's world, whether they're in marketing, whether they're in HR, whether they're in sales, R&D, we come from very different backgrounds. We land and you hear the pressure in our system, but you also see that connectivity, that support. healthy challenge, that accountability in action. And it is like a little shot in the arm for everyone that attends to say, okay, we remember this. And I think that opportunity for reflective space builds resilience in our groups.
And if we think about this in the last couple of minutes that we've got together today, I'm really interested in two things. One is you play a very, very integral part in this in a slightly different way, I think, than in lots of organisations. There's an element of sort of there's leadership, but there's also an element of control in this and making sure that everyone is individually supported and partnered, and there's a level of discipline, but you play a really important role in that. So I'm quite interested in that just briefly. Secondly, we cannot let people walk away from this conversation without the please don't do that. Like, I'm really worried. I see this behaviour in some organisations when they do this, and this is a disaster. Do not do this, please. So a bit about sort of your role and a bit about the don't do this, please be careful.
I think they're probably a little bit interlinked, to be honest, Matt. So hugely passionate about the role that coaching can play. Really important to me is that supervision ethical piece. It can get very swampy very quickly in internal coaching if you aren't aware of your accountability and responsibility, particularly around confidentiality and working in the system. And so supervision, I attended a supervision certification course, postgrad course, kind of naively thinking, I'll be the internal supervisor for our internal coaching pool. And at the end of day one, it was like, well, that ethically is just not going to fly. That's ridiculous. Why did I think that was a good idea? So I think you have to realise that you can't do everything, but you do have to make sure that you're listening, because the challenges have changed in the organisation over the last 4 years. If I wasn't attending that supervision regularly and listening to what those internal coaches are facing, I could naively send a little thing on the group chat and say, well done, everybody. But I wouldn't really be understanding the challenges, and I wouldn't really know what's going on. And we have to evolve. We are not doing the same thing in the coaching or the supervision that we were doing 4 years ago. We are changing it. Every conversation that Sophie and I have, we are thinking about what are we hearing and what do we do? And some of that I can do from an internal position. And some of that I need external support for. And I guess in other organisations, it has all been run internally. And therefore, you're not maybe doing the effective listening of what else is out there. What can we learn from other organisations? What other elements should we be bringing into this programme right now? Neurodiversity as an example. We did a dedicated neurodiversity supervision session a few months ago. We wouldn't have been doing that at the time that we did, I don't think, if Sophie and I hadn't had a conversation in advance. So there is definitely a role for quality external support and trying to do everything yourself. And I know budgets are tricky and time is tricky, but if you do it all yourself, then in organisations where that happens, ethically, I have a bit of cringe and anxiety, but more than that, I think that it's just quite dangerous. And the second thing, your original question, I panic when I hear in our organisation, it still happens a bit, we're getting better. Can I give you some coaching on that? And then you just give feedback. And that is driving me insane in organisations that I talk to about what we do from coaching. And coaching is not giving feedback. I just want to make that completely clear. They are very different tools. And yes, it's important to have good feedback skills, but please do not keep using the term, and HR professionals in particular. If you're going to give feedback, just be as direct and honest and candid and clear that you are giving feedback. You are not giving coaching 100%. In that moment.
100%.
Brilliant.
100%. It's really interesting listening to you. There's something that's really clearly comes out of this conversation that I've not heard before, actually, which is how do the leaders of the internal coaching pools use ongoing supervision, almost like listening to the voice of the system. So rather than seeing supervision as I go for my supervision, they see it as an insight into the world of 20 or 30 coaches who are supporting organisational leaders all over the shop, and they get that voice of truth in the room without calling it an organisational design interview. But actually, fundamentally, that is the principle of what you're listening to, the voice of the system.
Oh, 100%. Not the number of times, because we're quite lucky, but there have been times when Sophie and I have recognised, wow, the whole system right now needs this. Yeah. What should we do? Yeah, but I would also say, from being part of a senior leadership team, when an internal coach is working with someone from a completely different team and hearing and seeing the system challenges, the process challenges that they're facing in that role, they can step out of coach mode and give advice. Great. Yep. You know, there are times when that's necessary. But also they can then go back up the chain and say, hey, I understand in that part of the business at the moment, this is really, really tricky. It's not straightforward. It involves EU legislation. It involves all these magical powers that we're working on, but we haven't got yet. And so there's more empathy, I believe, that comes from having an internal coaching pool to the whole system and what's going on. So not only in supervision, but just in those one-to-one, hard, emotional conversations that are around the system, gives leaders gives everybody that's working in that internal coaching a different insight into what's going on more widely in the organisation and how can they support, but also can they have a corridor conversation or a check-in at the next senior leadership meeting and say, I get it. I've heard from the front line how tricky your world is right now. What can I do? And how much value, how you can measure that, please let me know. But I know that is one of the reasons why I persevere on the difficult days.
On the difficult days with the standards. Yeah. Okay, superb. I have a personal question as we close out, which is the likelihood is there will be people watching this going, I would love to have a chat with her. I'd love to have a chat with Vanessa to understand really what it looks like. How open are you for helping guide other organisations?
I mean, not long ago, I had some coaching myself, and the person who was coaching me was like, you're a bit of a learning evangelist. And that conversation has stayed with me for probably 15 years now. And I've learned that coaching isn't something that you should push necessarily all the time, the same as learning. I believe that learning and coaching can fix most business challenges, most business problems. But sometimes I need to just be quiet and listen, and somebody else might have a better idea. But fundamentally, this is why I show up every day. And I would be more than happy to talk to anybody about what they do to start this for themselves in an organisation where there will be lots of challenges. I've done something similar to this in 3 organisations. And I'm very, very aware of all the different challenges that I've experienced so far, and happy to help anyone get that first few conversations off the ground. Amazing. And the bit of funding that they might need. And I can also get, there are 30 people in my organisation that will happily talk on my behalf to any leaders or people that are interested on their personal journeys. How much they've each benefited from these programmes, the self-awareness they've built, the challenging conversations that they're more brave around now because of what they've experienced in their journey to be an internal coach. So yes, I'm happy to have that conversation, but I have absolute confidence that all of the participants of our programme, or your programme that we're so lucky to have in our organisation, I've got 30 evangelists that would have that conversation on my behalf if I couldn't.
Superb. Well, that's a lovely way to end the conversation. All right, brilliant. Thank you, Vanessa, for bringing your truth into this conversation. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
If today's episode resonated with your own experience, take it not as advice, but as a mirror. We'll be back next time with another coaching conversation that dares to go deeper. We look forward to seeing you then for some more courageously candid coaching conversations.